That is tough.
Hi, I'm Artist Gillespie.
Thank you.
And I'm looking for rebalancing Big Ag.
Yeah. Guide us.
Okay,
Yeah.
all right.
We're getting started.
Artist.
Artist.
A-R-T-I-S.
T-H-A-R-D-Y-T-H.
Oh.
And then you're not most
Hi, I'm Cynthia. Why don't I get one of you two together?
Let's tell them about my VA adventure.
Connell, you got it? Yay.
Want to jump in there?
Sherry, thanks for doing this.
I want one separately.
You got it. Yeah. Me too.
Can I touch you?
Oh, yeah.
Here, 1, 2, 3, and then you can go over here.
I don't care. I was drafted.
All right, and then we can get started.
Tell him.
Go.
Jerry, tell
Can
him.
you introduce us? Why Sherry?
T-O-E. I don't have one.
What's your phone?
I don't have one.
Okay.
I stay with you. I just stay with my kids.
Okay.
Because where I live, I don't have.
You're saying interest rates.
Hey, how are you? Good.
And this is your chair of the council. Democrats. Thank you for all the work that you're doing and the groundwork that you've laid for whoever's nominated to get
Oh man, I want to get some other folks here. Some of the other candidates.
Yeah. Well, they'll come. They'll follow. Are we the first presidential?
No, I've had,
We're going to come this way, right?
We could have given a stump speech.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for coming. This is a great crowd. And I'm hoping that we'll have other candidates also coming up. I've been working really hard trying to get other candidates to come. But their schedules and mine just don't jive for some reason. So, I don't know. It's my privilege as the county chair to introduce our guest today. Born and raised in El Paso, Texas, this man and his hometown both hold sacred the idea that we must respect and embrace our differences rather than fearing them. As you know, El Paso is a border town. For the past 2 decades, it has been one of the safest cities in the U.S., despite what the current man in the White House says about living on the border with Mexico. Throughout his career, from the El Paso City Council to U.S. Congressman, Beto has fought hard for his constituency, from working to improve the El Paso transit system, to extending health care to same-sex partners of city workers, to approving the El Paso VA, to protecting public lands and water for future generations. He has worked to find common ground with the Republicans to get the job done for the American people. When he ran for the Senate against Ted Cruz, he helped create change in Texas, which had ranked 50th in voter turnout. Young voter turnout went nearly 500%. New Democrats were elected to Congress, the state legislature, and the judiciary. When Beto announced his campaign for president, he said, quote, "This moment is our test. The generations that follow ours, the people of the future, are counting on us, and we cannot be found wanting," unquote. That's what his campaign is all about for Beto and his wife Amy, their children Ulysses, Molly, and Henry, and all the children all over America and all the generations yet to come. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to pronounce it correctly. I told him that I always mispronounce his name, but that's okay. My last name gets slaughtered too. Ladies and gentlemen, Beto O'Rourke.
Perfect pronunciation. Sherry, thank you for having me out, welcoming us to your community, bringing all these great people together on one of the most beautiful days of my 46 and a half years on this planet. We are in love with Southwest Iowa. We began this morning in, we were at a good volume, in Shenandoah, and then continued on to Red Oak, and we're now here in Atlantic. And the drive along the way, the fields, the trees, everything in bloom, the homes, and especially the people that we met along the way, just made this one of the best days ever. So thank you for being a part of it. Thank you for welcoming us to your community. We're grateful to be here. Huge honor. So I want to begin by wishing you a happy Cinco de Mayo. This is the day that we celebrate the Battle of Puebla, the first Battle of Puebla in 1862. This is where the forces of President Benito Juarez defeated the imperialist forces of Napoleon III, who was invading Mexico. And one of the things that you may not know about what followed after that battle that I've just recently learned is that Benito Juarez, after the second Battle of Puebla, which the Mexicans lost, left the capital and came up north to the very northernmost part of Chihuahua, our bordering state in Texas, and in a community called Paso del Norte set up a provisional government and headquarters to fight the imperialist French. He later moves out of Paso del Norte. The Mexicans ultimately win that long war, reassert their independence. But in the 1880s, they rename that community, which had been called Paso del Norte, or El Paso del Norte, to Ciudad Juarez. Now, Ciudad Juarez is the sister city of my hometown of El Paso. We stole the name from the former Paso del Norte. And our two cities on the Chihuahuan side and Texas side of the U.S.-Mexico border, joined, not separated by the Rio Grande River, are home to 3 million from these two countries, speaking two languages, with these two different histories and cultures, forming something far greater, far more powerful than the sum of their parts or the number of people involved. And that city's history goes all the way back to Cinco de Mayo in 1862, which I thought was fascinating. And as I was researching the history of Atlantic, your community, I saw that you were founded in 1868, so not too long after those events of Cinco de Mayo. And I read, and you'll have to tell me if this is true, as we would say in El Paso, dicen que your town was named Atlantic because it is halfway between the Pacific and the Atlantic Oceans, and your city's founders flipped a coin to decide which name you would choose. Is that true? That's a pretty good story, whether or not it's true. But it's great to be here with you and to share this day with you and to share in our democracy at one of the most defining moments in American history. The range of challenges that we face are the greatest of our lifetimes. I don't care how young or how old you are. Tens of millions unable to see a doctor or afford prescription medication in the wealthiest, the most powerful country on the face of the planet that does not want for resources or medical technology. We have people in the year 2019 being consumed by diabetes, by the flu, by curable cancers. All that we lack is the political will to decide that every single one of us should be able to see a physician, afford our medications, go to a mental health care provider, make our own choices about our own bodies, and invest in one another so that we can live to our full potential. That's how we meet that challenge, right? We've got an economy that is going gangbusters for a few people in this country at a time of historic wealth and income inequality, the greatest since the last Gilded Age of the late 19th century. You have folks in this country working 2 and 3 jobs just to make ends meet. Increasingly, that includes school teachers and public school educators, who I would argue already have the most important job in front of them, unlocking that lifelong love of learning that resides within every single child. If we can do that, there's no stopping that kid, and there's no stopping us as a country. So why do we pay school teachers? and cafeteria workers and school bus drivers and counselors and librarians a fraction of what they are worth and what they need to be able to survive on one job. What if we met that challenge by deciding that we were going to pay teachers and public school educators a living wage, that we were going to invest in a world-class system of public school education that begins not at 5 or 4 years old in kindergarten, where, get this, some of you may know this, I just learned it, some kids on the first day of kindergarten are 10 months back in reading comprehension, 12 months back in math, and I guarantee you they will almost never catch up. There's never a moment to press pause and catch up to everybody else. They are behind for the rest of their lives. If we invested in universal pre-K, starting that education not at 4 or 5, but 3 or 4, we move the starting line back so everyone has an even chance at success in their lives. It does not come cheap, will not be easy, but it is something if we set our minds to, we can make that investment that will produce returns for the lifetime of that child, of their family, and of this country. We can meet the challenge. We can meet the challenge of a system of immigration that today seems to deny our history and our heritage, that this country, unique amongst the nations of the world, is not defined by race or ethnicity or common genealogy. It's this idea, 243 years and counting, that we were all created equal, to equal opportunity, equal chance to reveal our genius to ourselves, to our families, to one another, and to this great country, comprised of people who can trace their family line back 10,000 years to this country. They crossed the Bering Strait, or more than 300 years. They crossed in the holds of slave ships, kidnapped from countries in West Africa to literally build the wealth of this country. They are the O'Rourkes from the 19th century, fleeing famine in Ireland, coming to the one place that would take them in and relieve them of a future that might include death, a death that claimed more than 1 million people on that island alone from the potato famine, or those who are showing up today. They've traveled 2,000 miles by foot, if they're lucky, atop, not inside of a train, called the Beast or La Bestia. Now think about this. What would compel you to scoop up your baby girl, your little boy, and make that 2,000-mile journey? It's not because you're a bad person or a loafer or you're trying to steal something from me or somebody else in this country. Nobody makes a 2,000-mile journey with a kid. I have a hard time making a 1-mile journey with my kids unless you have to do that, and it is the only way that you have any hope of saving their lives. The Northern Triangle countries of Central America, Honduras, Guatemala, El Salvador, are among the most violent, most brutal places on the face of the planet today. When you compound that with food insecurity that is a product of climate change, historic droughts never seen in the Northern Triangle until now, you produce the conditions that would cause a parent just like you, just like me, to make that journey 2,000 miles or to send their kid unaccompanied. 2 weeks ago, they just found a 3-year-old boy in a cornfield outside of Brownsville, Texas, alone, with a phone number written in permanent marker on his shoe. Now, I wouldn't send one of my kids out alone unless I thought that was the only way we were going to be able to save their lives. Our system of immigration, our system of handling these asylum seekers, which right now means that we put them in cages, deport their moms back to the country from which they fled, separate those families. God only knows where some of those kids are now, visiting a cruelty and a torture on them that I hope we will only ever be able to imagine because we will never experience it. That's what this country of immigrants and asylum seekers and refugees is doing right now. We have the opportunity to meet this challenge. You're all good. Not only by making sure that we no longer separate these families, making sure that we reunite those who have been separated, but rewriting this country's immigration laws in our own image to look like us, where we are here in Atlantic, Iowa, where I live in El Paso, Texas, to make sure that those living in the shadows, more than 1 million dreamers brought here at a young age through no fault of their own, now contributing in every way measurable and immeasurable to the success of this country, free them forever from any fear of deportation by making them U.S. citizens in this, their true home country. Bring their parents out of the shadows, those who are working some of the toughest jobs in America, in Iowa. I was just in Storm Lake, and I was talking to a descendant of an immigrant who'd opened up a bakery. And he was telling me that his family came to Storm Lake following the meatpacking jobs, that for whatever reason, most people born in Storm Lake are not working. Their families came to do that work, are investing in that community, are opening up restaurants like those, are raising the next generation that is restoring the vitality of communities like Storm Lake, of Atlantic, of my hometown, of El Paso. What if we rewrote our immigration laws to ensure that those who want to work here, contribute to our success, can do so, can come out of the shadows, register and get right with our government, join their families, and contribute to the next generation of the American story? That's a challenge that we can overcome. And then perhaps the greatest challenge of them all, the fact that this planet has warmed 1 degree Celsius just since 1980 over pre-industrial revolution levels. 1 degree Celsius, which has contributed to the flooding that we've seen along the Missouri. There was 4 times the runoff into the Missouri River Basin of an average year. In fact, the greatest runoff since we've been keeping records of the Missouri River. I was just in Pacific Junction. Talk about Pacific Junction from Atlantic, Iowa. And that town is gone. Every single structure was covered by water. I walked into a house built in 1908. The owners of that house are going in trying to salvage whatever they can, but they will not be able to live in that house again. It is just absolutely total. Will Pacific Junction make it going forward? I don't know. I met the mayor, Mayor Young. He's going to do everything within his power, as are the residents there, to bring it back. But it brings the question to us, if these floods that we are seeing in Iowa, on the western side of the state, the floods that we're seeing on the eastern side near the Mississippi and Davenport, where we have the highest flood levels, broke the record from 1993, broke every record before it. The greatest rainfall in Houston, Texas, 58 inches of rain fell from the sky. In fact, that is the landfall record from a single storm for as long as we've been keeping them in North America. The wildfires that we just had in California, the worst wildfires that we've ever had in California. These storms, these droughts, these floods, these fires will only get exponentially worse going forward unless we use the limited time left to us. As scientists say, about 10 years to change course before it is too late for the generations, the little people who are here with us today, the generations that follow us, their kids, their grandkids, are going to be dealing with something far worse, almost hellish, relative to anything that we've known in our lives. But we have a chance, and in fact, Iowa has led the way in ensuring that we free ourselves from a dependence on fossil fuels, invest in renewable energy and the next generation of technologies that allow us to store the renewable energy that we are generating. Help farmers do more because farmers want to do more. Planting cover crops to capture more of the carbon out of the air, using precision tilling to disturb less of the carbon in the soil, re-upping the conservation fund so that we don't have to cultivate every single square inch of acreage for corn or soybean production, and so that we can make sure that we're doing our part, that everyone in this country is doing their part at this last defining moment of truth. And if we do all of that, we can take our rightful role as the indispensable nation, convene the other powers of the planet to do their part as well, and then maybe, just maybe, we'll be okay for these little guys and gals who are with us here today, having met that challenge with our confidence, with our courage, with our strength, with the American people, regardless of the differences. No me importa if you're a Democrat or a Republican or an independent, live in a small town or a big city. The challenges before us are too great to be defined by our differences. Instead, going forward, we should be forever known by our ambitions, our aspirations, the work, the service, the sacrifice we're willing to bring to bear in order to achieve them. That's why I'm here. That's why I hope that you are here. And that's why I'm running to serve you as the next president of the United States of America. Thank you for having me out. Grateful to be with you. And looking forward to answering your questions. Cynthia Cano is right here. So if you get Cynthia's attention, she'll bring you a microphone and we'll bring you into the conversation. Love to hear what's on your mind.
I would like to know, are you proposing Medicare for all? Because that's really what I would like to see. I talk to people from all over the world, and unfortunately, they're grateful that they live where they live in other countries, because if they were in America, they'd be dead.
Yeah.
They'd be dead.
I don't think the second mic is working, whoever's got the board. You got it on? So for those who didn't hear the question, how do we get to universal guaranteed high quality health care? There's a proposal called Medicare for America. It's written by two women with whom I used to serve from Illinois and from Connecticut, Jan Schakowsky, Rosa DeLauro. This is what it does. For the tens of millions of our fellow Americans who have no coverage or insurance at all, they may be among those who get arrested on purpose to go to the county jail to have their schizophrenia or bipolar disorder treated. In some states like mine, the county jail system is the largest provider of mental health care services today. They are enrolled in Medicare going forward, so they can afford their treatment, their care, see a primary care provider, go to a psychologist or psychiatrist, be well enough to live to their full potential, to go to school the next day, to go to work, to pay taxes, to shoulder their fair share of the burden so that it rests a little bit lighter on everybody else. Those who have employer-sponsored insurance and like it, as tens of millions of our fellow Americans do, are able to keep it if it works for them and their families. If that employer-sponsored insurance is insufficient because you cannot afford your premiums or your co-pays, or the deductible is too large to bridge, then you're free to elect to go over to Medicare. It's not an inexpensive proposition, but it's a lot less cheaper than the way that we pay or fail to pay for healthcare today, and it's the surest, quickest path to get us to universal, guaranteed, high-quality care. Thank you for asking. Appreciate it.
Hey, right here to your right.
Thank you very much, Congressman O'Rourke, for being here in Atlantic. We really appreciate that. My name is Brad. I'm originally from Atlantic. I currently live in Des Moines. You mentioned renewable energy in your beginning speech, which I appreciate. Iowa's a leader in renewable energy, whether that's ethanol, biodiesel, the wind industry. In fact, we have a first-generation ethanol plant here in Atlantic. I wanted to ask you about your position on the renewable fuel standard. This law that was signed in back in 2005 and expanded in 2007 really allows the industry to thrive here in Iowa and in the Midwest. Do you support the renewable fuel standard? And then on wind energy, do you support policies that would enable that industry to grow even further? Thank you very much.
Yeah. So this mic might be a little too loud now. And if we want, we can just use one mic. Let's turn that down a little bit more, please. Thank you.
Check. Yeah, I don't think this is working, so I'll switch back.
Okay.
Here we go. I'm gonna give you that.
Okay. Still maybe a little loud, but the answers to your two questions are yes and yes. I support the renewable fuel standard. It's been a great lesson in how we can begin to reduce our dependence on fossil fuels in this country. I believe we've taken about 10% of the gasoline off of the market by what we are growing here. We're also freeing farmers from a dependence on commodity markets over which they have no control, adding value to our communities, and going to one of these ethanol facilities in West Burlington, Iowa. I saw young people who had decided to stay or move back to their communities for high-paying, high-skill, high-value jobs that are doing something not just for the economy, but for the planet and for the generations that follow. You asked about wind energy. Yes, I support the production tax credit that ensures that we have the investment and capital necessary to continue to allow Iowa to be a leader in wind. I believe you generate more wind as a share of your total energy portfolio than any other state. Texas generates more wind in absolute terms than any other state. We can build on that to bring other states into the mix and also complement that with geothermal and solar. I live in El Paso, Texas, one of the sunniest cities in the United States of America. We're beginning to build out utility scale solar now, as well as putting it on the roofs of our homes, as we just did in the O'Rourke household. So yes, we just proposed a $5 trillion over 10-year plan that includes investments in these technologies to make sure that by 2050, we have net zero greenhouse gas emissions. Thanks for the questions. Appreciate it.
Going back to the Medicare for All, the policies the program that's in place that they're working towards, does it change the payment status? Medicare pays very quickly, but I did Medicare insurance claims at a hospital in Ohio, and they had large amounts that the hospital had to write off and very small amount that was paid. Physicians don't want to take Medicare patients, not because it's a slow payment, but because they're getting a very small amount. So I'm concerned that that's really going to harm our healthcare system. I agree, we need change, insurance for all. I totally agree with that, but I'm concerned. So is there a change in the payment amounts and process along with this?
Yes, thank you. Thanks for the question. When we were in Shenandoah earlier today, an EMS technician asked me a similar question, said, we're not able to make it on reimbursements for Medicaid and Medicare anymore. So if part of your program, he warned me, is to reduce reimbursements to make this affordable, it's just not going to work. You're going to price me out of a job. You're going to price physician assistants. You're going to price doctors out of being able to provide care. And I agree with him, and I agree with what you were saying. And I think that Iowa is actually a lesson in this. As Iowa has privatized Medicaid and reimbursement rates have come down, it's made it much harder for people to provide care and get reimbursed for it, and then subsequently for people to receive care. In Texas, over the course of 1 year, we had 6 rural hospitals closed down in a state that failed altogether to expand Medicaid. They literally just could not balance the books any longer. I talked to one of the directors of one of your rural hospitals in Iowa before I made this most recent trip, and he said they're really just on the brink. It's a day-to-day proposition for them right now. So in Iowa, under Medicaid today, I think we've got to up the reimbursement levels, and then under any plan, whether it's Medicare for America or Medicare for All, which is the plan that you brought up, reimbursements have to be commensurate with the value that's being provided, the ability to make a profit, and the ability to attract providers to communities that are otherwise going to be underserved. In El Paso, Texas, we have one of the worst doctor-to-patient ratios in the country. We're on level with Syria and Panama or third world countries. And in part, it is because of our reimbursement rates compared to other cities in Texas. So yes, that must be standardized. And we must also provide inducements to bring people to rural communities to be able to practice. Thanks for asking the question. Yep.
Hi, my name's Ciara and I live about 30 miles east of here in a town called Adair. I'm wondering what makes you qualified to be president, and more so than the other candidates, and why you want to do that job and why you want to do that job right now.
Yeah. What am I thinking, right? Great questions. You will have to answer them, but I'll help to give some information upon which you can make your decision. Because you've got perhaps the greatest field of candidates to choose from in the history of the Democratic Party. The unique talents, life experiences, backgrounds, states that different people come from and represent, it's amazing. And I just count myself lucky to be among them. So back in the late 1990s in El Paso, I started a small, with some good friends, a small technology firm. So I know what it's like to start a business, to create jobs, especially high value, high wage, high skilled jobs in a community that needed those kinds of jobs. What it's like to hustle day in, day out to make sure that you can meet payroll week in and week out. Served on the El Paso City Council, not as a Democrat, not as a Republican, nonpartisan elected position, just as an El Pasoan, balancing the books every single year, making sure that our police and firefighters were paid, listening to my constituents. I held a town hall meeting like this for 6 years every single week so that I could explain my votes the week before, preview the agenda the next week, and then be accountable to those whom I served. It made me a far better city council rep than I otherwise would have been. In 2012, I took on the odds and the incumbent and won a race for U.S. Congress, served 6 years, every single day of it, in the minority as a Democrat with a Republican majority, but was able to pass legislation that helped my constituents. We expanded access to mental health care for veterans at a time that 20 veterans a day, every day, are taking their lives in this country. The majority of them have not been able to get into a VA or were unwilling to do so. I just talked to Lewis about the VA in Omaha and some challenges there. We were able to improve performance and outcomes by focusing on it and finding the common ground with Republicans to get it accomplished. That law to expand mental health care, by the way, signed into law by Donald Trump, someone with whom I agree on almost nothing. And yet we found enough common ground to get that done. Ran a campaign across the state of Texas in every one of the 254 counties. Did not matter to me how red or blue, how big or small. We went to not the reddest county in the state of Texas, but the reddest county in the United States of America. King County voted for Donald Trump 96% in the last election, but we went to King County because they're every bit as deserving of our respect, of being heard, of being listened to, of being fought for, of being served. And how in the world could I hope to serve King County if I had not shown up there first to listen to what was on the minds of the people in King County? So, whether it's the fact that I live on the U.S.-Mexico border, we're raising our kids there right now at a time that the U.S.-Mexico border dominates the attention of this country and our national conversation, or that we ran a campaign in a very red state, got more votes than any Democrat in the history of the state of Texas, saw young voter turnout up 500%, won independence for the first time in 10 years, 500,000 Republicans who voted for our Republican governor also voted for me on the same ballot, and my mom, a lifetime Republican, also voted for me on the same ballot. This way of bringing people in, not writing anybody off, not taking anybody for granted, staying focused firmly on the future and what we hope to achieve together at this very divided moment, I hope that I can bring that to the conversation in this campaign. Thanks for asking the question. Sir.
How are you doing, Congressman? My name is CJ Saunders. I'm actually from Kansas, which, quick correction earlier, Kansas is the leading production of wind as far as percentage of everything. We just overtook Iowa. This just happened last year. I'm sorry.
You're a brave man to say that in Iowa. Yeah.
I'm actually here working on the wind farm about 20 miles north of here. And my question to you is, part of my side job is I'm in the Army Reserves. And my question is, what is your plan for addressing Russian aggression in Eastern Europe and also reforming the State Department should you be elected?
Great questions. Thank you. We have a real opportunity right now, and that's the nice way of saying that this president has put us in a really bad place in this world. He's squandered the sacrifices going back 80 years to those brave men who left this community to fight in World War II, after which not only did they make the world safe for democracy, but they were the force that helped to forge the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. 29 countries. The only time our Common Defense Clause has been invoked was when this country was attacked on 9/11 in 2001. And yet our president has questioned whether NATO still makes sense today, which invites further Russian aggression in the NATO member states to test whether you or I or our kids are going to go off and fight another war. We know that Russia has already invaded Crimea. We know that they've invaded Ukraine. We know that they've invaded Georgia. It's only a matter of time if we give them the opportunity to do that. On top of that, they have invaded our democracy. Beyond the shadow of a doubt, regardless of what party you belong to, that in 2016, Russia manipulated our democracy, our perception of our politicians, and perhaps swayed the outcome of a national election with no real consequence from this president. In fact, after the Mueller report was released, he called Vladimir Putin and was on the phone with him for an hour describing the investigation as a hoax. So I want to make sure that our country is defended from military aggression. I want to make sure that our country is protected from any kind of manipulation of our democracy. I want to stand with our traditional allies and friends and stop cozying up to strong men and dictators, not just Vladimir Putin, but you know this. I've got to say it out loud because I hope the people of the future will not be able to believe this. Kim Jong-un, who is this murderous dictator of North Korea, who has nuclear weapons and now the intercontinental ballistic missiles with which he could deliver them to the United States, who has the blood of Otto Warmbier, a U.S. citizen, on his hands, who murders and starves his own people. Our president of the United States of America said that he is falling in love with him. Whether it's Kim Jong-un, whether it is MBS in Saudi Arabia, Duterte in the Philippines, al-Sisi in Egypt, At this moment that the world is trying to decide whether dictatorships and autocracy or democracy is the way forward, the president of our country is choosing the worst forms of government and the worst partners for the United States of America. Instead, in addition to reforging those friendships, let's bring the world together to confront climate change, nuclear proliferation, terrorism, and get us out of the wars that we've been in for 28 years in Iraq, 18 years in Afghanistan, and U.S. service members' lives on the line tonight in Syria, in Yemen, in Somalia, in Libya as well. We need to work with the rest of the world if we're going to be able to do that. And the last foreign policy opportunity is this hemisphere. The people that we are literally connected to by land, by family, by culture, increasingly by language. We need to invest in the future of those countries, or the future of those countries will come to our border and will be met by our asylum laws or our walls, but we want those folks to be able to stay where they are by ensuring their communities are safe and that we reduce violence there. That's a great foreign policy opportunity. And it means that we invest in the State Department and we lead with our diplomats, not with our soldiers. Make sure that they're carrying the weight of resolving these conflicts non-violently, peacefully. That's the way that we can do this going forward. Thanks for asking the question. Appreciate it.
Straight back.
Dave Chase, a retired attorney here in Atlantic, and did a lot of tax work in my practice. I'd like you to comment on the deficit and the projected $1 trillion that will be added to that deficit through, quote, tax reform.
Yeah. Thank you for the question. So we're over $22 trillion in debt right now. And we're going to have to look at how we got here if we're going to find a way to get out of here. When I talk about the people of the future reading their history books on the people of 2019 and 2018 and 2017, another thing they will not be able to believe is that at a moment that we had $4 trillion in outstanding infrastructure needs, roads, bridges, broadband internet for rural Iowa and rural America, at a moment that we were fighting wars all over the world, at a moment that we were not paying our teachers a living wage, had tens of millions of Americans who could not afford insurance, our response to that was to cut a $2 trillion tax break that flowed disproportionately to the very wealthiest people in this country at a time of historic wealth inequality, and also flowed to corporations at a time of record corporate profits. So that tax break, that tax cut, $2 trillion, the $1 trillion deficit spending that we're projecting for this next year, the trillions added to the debt by the George W. Bush tax cuts, those wars that I just described that we are fighting, well, 28 years in Iraq, 18 years in Afghanistan adds up to trillions of dollars in debt. Pretty soon the service on that debt, as you probably know as an accountant, is going to occlude any opportunity to invest in infrastructure or education or quality of life or the next generation. So we've got to stop digging the hole. We've got to reverse the worst of those Trump tax cuts. We took the corporate rate from 35% down to 21%. We don't have to go all the way back up, but if we went into the mid-20s, we would generate hundreds of billions of dollars just over the next 10 years. If we made sure that tax breaks flowed not to the very wealthiest, but to the working poor so that they could get ahead and maybe not have to take that second or third job. If we provided an inducement for small business owners to create the jobs and take the risk that we need for this economy really to hum, then we will find a way to work our way out of this problem. And to the gentleman's question about foreign policy, if we stop going to war everywhere to try to solve our problems, and this president has threatened war with at least 3 countries that I know of so far, to include North Korea, Iran, and Venezuela, not only is there a tragic cost in human life, both lost here from our fellow Americans and the lives that we take in the name of this country, but there's a loss of trillions of dollars that we will never get back. So those are some ways that we can look at stopping the practices that have led to this, and ensuring that economic growth is really driven from the bottom, investing in people and communities. Thanks for the question. Appreciate it.
Here's our next question. Hi, I'm Briar Rose. I'm an Atlantic High School journalist. Thank you for coming out today. I was wondering what you are going to do to put America back in a position of respect in the world.
So I mentioned a little bit about what we could do around the world, right? We don't have to fight wars everywhere. We should have the humility of understanding that we cannot fix other countries for them. We can be helpful, and we certainly are. And we have a proud, long tradition of doing that. But we cannot impose our system of government, our way of life, our practices and policies on other people. Those are decisions that they have to make. So treating people with respect, I think, is fundamental. Living our values in our foreign policy. We can't have this foundational document that says that we are all created equal. We cannot cherish our liberty and our democracy and then cozy up to these dictators and strongmen around the world. We cannot have these relationships of convenience because the difference between what we say and how we act is not lost on the rest of the world, and that lowers our standing. But then I'll bring this back home. We also have to lead by example in the United States of America. And though this isn't always an easy thing to talk about or an easy thing for us to hear, unless we confront it, I don't know that we're ever going to make it better. In this country, we have the largest prison population on the face of the planet. We lock more of our own up than does any other country. China, Russia, North Korea, all these places that we talk about, we're doing it to ourselves. And that prison population is disproportionately comprised of people of color. A lot of them there for non-violent drug crimes, including possession of marijuana, a substance that is legal or decriminalized or medicinalized in more than half the states in the country. And those who are released from prison will be forced to check a box on every employment application form going forward, saying that they have a conviction, making it less likely that they get the job. Will no longer qualify for grants and student loans to pursue higher education and improve themselves. And it is not a problem that just exists in adult life. At 5 years old, in a kindergarten classroom, a child of color is 5 times as likely to be disciplined as a white child in the same classroom. When we talk about a schoolhouse to jailhouse pipeline, it begins at a very tender age with the most vulnerable among us. There's 10 times the wealth in white America today than there is in black America today, and that is not an accident. The wealth of this country was literally built by the ancestors of many black Americans who never had a chance to enjoy the fruits of their labor, and subsequently through Jim Crow and segregation and suppression and redlining were prevented from building wealth going forward. So when we talk about our standing in the rest of the world, I think we need to talk about how we treat each other back here at home. We have to face the consequences of our history and our continuing suppression of fellow Americans. It's only then that you begin the work of repair and we begin to stop visiting these injustices on future generations and really have the opportunity to lead by example and continue to inspire the rest of the planet. Thanks for the question. Appreciate that.
Over here to your right.
Thank you, Congressman. My name is John Masterson. My wife, Linda Emerson, our son. I also work with CJ. We're wind technicians. I'm from Tucson, Arizona. We're out here visiting your lovely community, so thank you for having us. I just wanted to know if you had any plans on reducing student loan interest debt. It's over $1 trillion, and it's just going to go up and up and up. For me, example, I went to a for-profit college that disbanded itself. It doesn't exist anymore. They promised us all kinds of stuff, and how can you fight for-profit colleges and ensuring generations like my son and new high school students that they can go to college, get an education, and work without having to pay buku bucks?
Yeah.
Thank you.
You're right. There's over $1.5 trillion in outstanding student loan debt. The default rate is about 10%. So we know that this is crushing people. They can't hold this burden without just sinking under the weight of it. I think the average college graduate now has about $40,000 that they are paying back. I know when I was 18 years old and signing up for those student loans every single year that I was in college, I had no conception of what that meant, nor did I understand it's the one kind of debt that you will never shake until you pay it off or until you're in the grave. This is on you for life until you get it right. And what we find that we're doing is we're asking people to take out loans in addition to working, in addition to paying whatever they can out of their own pocket or bank accounts for their college education, to become public school educators, doctors, psychiatrists, psychologists, civil engineers, the people who actually make our communities, our country, our society work. And it's not working right now for too many, and it's causing others to decide not to go to college because they don't want to have that kind of burden on them. Here's some ways that I think we can meet the challenge. First, as we were talking about when it comes to deficit spending and our national debt, stop digging the hole. Make community college free for every American who wants to attend it so they don't take on any debt at all. Ensure that if they're pursuing a 4-year degree at a public financed, public serving university, that they pay their fair share, but they don't take on debt in order to be able to better themselves so that they can better all of us. And then for those who currently hold that debt right now or are paying it back, let's refinance, as you suggested, at much lower rates. If we have a 10% default rate, let's get that default rate down to 0 by making sure that your payments are affordable. Something is better than nothing, and right now we're getting nothing from far too many of those who took out those loans. And then lastly, and this is most exciting to me, I mentioned the VA. I mentioned Lewis telling me about some of his experiences at the VA in Omaha. There are 45,000 funded but unfilled positions at the VA today. 45,000 clinical positions. So veterans waiting in line not for hours, but days, weeks, months, years to see a provider to get the care that they've earned by serving their country, putting their life on the line for all of us. If you're willing to work at the VA in one of those unfilled positions, let's wipe clean in total the debt that you owe so that you can focus on taking care of those who stood up for us. If you're willing to teach or become a public school educator in an underserved community, come back to your hometown perhaps, a decision you could not afford if you had to pay back all those student loan debts, let's wipe those debts clean so that you can focus on public service and being back home. That is a true public benefit, and it's something that I think the public should invest in to make that possible. Last thing, not everybody wants to go to college, and so we should not ignore those who want to pursue a career without higher education. Make it easier for them to join a union, learn a trade, become an apprentice, command a skill that will allow them to command a living wage for the rest of their lives. We've seen a degradation in the strength and power of unions. We've also seen a degradation in the middle class and the ability for people to move into the middle class. We can strengthen unions, and that strengthens our country as well. Thanks for the question. Appreciate it.
Okay, straight back, and these are going to be my last 2 questions right here.
Hi, it's Pam Elwood. I want to thank you because you have pretty much addressed many of the questions that I came with. I work in early childhood. My husband works in a jail, so we're very aware of that preschool to prison pipeline. I spend a lot of hours taking care of my dad in elder care, and I have a student in college. So thank you for all of that. What I'm wondering is, what are some of your success stories in El Paso based on the current policies and realities? I love that statement that we're joined by the river versus separated. But I'm just wondering, what have been your workarounds? How are you guys finding success there? And what are you doing to kind of bring some unity and sanity back?
Thanks for the question. So when I was running for Congress in 2011 and 2012, we were heavily outspent, and we made a virtue of a necessity by just knocking on doors all day, every day. I took Thanksgiving off, and I knew not to knock on your door on Super Bowl Sunday because it'd make you mad, or if the Cowboys were on TV. But I knocked on 16,000 doors over the course of that campaign. Learned a lot, including this one conversation in January of 2012. I knocked on this gentleman's door, introduced myself, and he said, look, if you really want to help, you're going to fix the VA. And I said, well, what do you mean by that? And he said, I just called, and mind you, this is January, I just called to make a mental health care appointment to treat my PTSD that I brought back with me 50 years ago from Vietnam, earned this help, and they told me to call back next year, 12 months from now. And I thought, this ornery old guy is just making a point with me. He's just trying to tell me that the VA care is not what it should be. Turns out he was absolutely right. El Paso, Texas had the worst wait times to see a mental health care provider in the country for veterans. And care delayed became care denied, led to some really horrific and sometimes tragic outcomes. So, as a freshman member of Congress, in the minority, I knew that I could not go back and give great speeches and say, those darn Republicans are standing in our way. We had to take action. And so our workaround was to find private and public providers of mental health care and primary health care in El Paso to fill the gap that the VA was unable to do. I also hired myself on at no charge as one of the chief recruiters for the El Paso VA, and we went from 68 full-time mental health care staff to just under 120 today. So if we got a psychiatrist who had any interest at all in coming to El Paso, I got his or her cell phone number, called to introduce myself as the congressman, and helped to recruit them down to El Paso. A singular focus on the problem. You know, who cares about the politics or your party affiliation? Let's just get it done. And not only did we increase our staffing and improve the number of appointments and the outcomes, we are no longer worst in the nation. And some days we actually improve upon the national average. And I mentioned earlier, we took that to Congress for the nation as a whole to expand mental health care access, did it with Republicans in leadership. Protected public lands. Under the Trump administration, he is downsizing the size of our national monuments. We wanted to increase them in Texas. There's one part of the Chihuahuan Desert called Kastner Range, 7,000 acres, that holds 10,000 years of recorded human history. You know, the first Americans leaving their impressions on the rocks and the caves. It might have been developed, but we were able to get it into the National Defense Authorization Bill because it's owned by the United States Army right now, protected and signed into law by President Trump. Now, don't tell him, because I don't know that he knows that that was in the bill that he signed, but we found a way, right? By hook or by crook, whatever it takes, we're going to make sure that we deliver. Work with anyone, anytime, anywhere. We work with John Cornyn, our senior Republican U.S. Senator, to invest in border security at our ports of entry in the largest binational community in the Western Hemisphere, to improve our quality of life, the ability for what you grow here to find markets in Mexico through our ports of entry, and also to keep us safer and secure in our homes and in our communities. So I'm trying to make the case to you that I will find a way to work with anyone, anytime, to get this done for our country on the issues that are small, on the biggest issues before us. That's been our history of success. Thanks for asking. Yeah.
Okay, this is going to be our last question.
I have a real concern about gun control. In this area, probably a number of people here enjoy hunting, deer hunting, pheasant hunting, and I think most people would agree we're very opposed to school shooting, automatic weapons, and that kind of thing.
Right.
Most hunters, I think, understand you're not going to take their hunting rifles, but why can't we enact legislation that gets rid of the automatic weapons and still preserves the right for people to hunt? Give me your strongest argument about how you're going to solve that.
Yeah. Like you, I come from a very proud gun-owning state. And we take that heritage and our responsibility and our accountability for owning and using firearms very seriously. I remember my dad teaching me, and my great uncle Raymond, who was a sheriff's deputy and a sharpshooter at a very young age, those important lessons. And we've taught our kids the same. And we use our guns to hunt, or for self-defense, or for sport, or for collection. And we should continue to be able to do that. But we should also have some ability of ensuring that guns do not fall into the hands of those who should not own them. And what we have learned from states that have adopted universal background checks with no loopholes, no Charleston loophole, which says that if we're unable to do the background check in so many days, you can just have the gun. No boyfriend loophole that says if it was your boyfriend or girlfriend who was beating you up and you didn't have a legal relationship with them, we won't count that as part of the criteria for the background check. No gun show or internet loophole. Just if you're going to buy a firearm, you're going to go through a background check. And if we find that you will be a danger to yourself or to somebody else in a country that loses more than 30,000 of our fellow Americans to gun violence every year, no other country comes close. So either we are uniquely violent or bad, or there's something wrong with us, or there's a human solution to this problem. Universal background checks have cut gun violence in half in those states that have adopted them. So adopted for the country, and for whatever value there is still in polls and polling, when they ask Republicans this question, they are in support of universal background checks. When they ask gun owners, they are in support of universal background checks. When they ask the NRA, they are not in support of universal background checks, which may explain the discrepancy because the NRA, the gun lobby, those political action committees that can pour so many millions of dollars and organize so many millions of voters are feared by those in positions of power and trust who are looking at their next reelection and do not want to upset that very important lobby. I think if we disregard that influence, and I don't take any PAC money from any organization, including the NRA, no help from any lobbyists, we'll just focus on one another. My child, Henry, came home from school last spring. His teacher just organized an active shooter drill in his classroom. He came and told us how he and his fellow students were huddled into the closet, resisted the temptation to open the door when somebody impersonating a shooter knocked on it. Why is she not focusing on helping him to read or add? I don't want her to think about putting herself between Henry and an active shooter in that classroom. And then this question that you raise about the kinds of weapons that are allowed to be sold to our fellow Americans. I was at a town hall in Wichita Falls, and this was not too long after the Parkland shooting. And a Vietnam-era veteran came up to me, and he said, listen, I served in Vietnam, I was drafted, did what they asked me to do. That young man in Parkland, Florida, had a more powerful weapon against defenseless, unarmed high school students than I did in the jungles of Vietnam. Those weapons of war designed to kill people as effectively, as efficiently, in as great a number as possible, keep them on the battlefield because they're really good at doing that. But no longer sell them into our communities because they end up in our schools, in our churches, in our concerts, in our public lives, in our synagogues. And there's a human solution to this problem. Again, there's a political cost and consequence to it. I'm well aware of that as a Texan who just ran statewide. But our conscience, our kids will not allow us to do anything other than the right thing. And I think this is going to be our moment to pass those two things. Universal background checks, no more weapons of war. Okay. So we'll allow you to have this one last question. I'm going to defy Cynthia. I'm sorry about this, Cynthia, but you were so persistent. And then we'll really have to wrap up. I'm going to pass this microphone back. Thank you.
My name is Rosa. I live in Atlantic, Iowa. I also have a dear question to me, to my heart. As you can see, I look different, I speak different, and my accent is completely different. So my question is, I do care for the people that is at the border and all this atrocity that's been happening lately with my kids. Those are my kids. They look like me, they feel like me. So they are my kids, and I'm sure everybody's kids. I do not believe that sending all these people to sanctuary cities is the appropriate way to deal with it, because default the state with sanctuary cities are, and at the same time, what are you gonna do after you take, if you were to be the next president? Because your name is just easy to pronounce, Beto. So I will be working for you in this campaign very hard, because whatever I do, I have to do it double than the people that is born in here to make it accomplished, and I have to convince my fellow Spanish speakers to vote for you, those who has the appropriate paper, if not, tramit the papers for them to become citizens so they could be able to vote. So there is a long period, and that could be a year to do the paperwork for them, but we have to screen them too. But I also would like to know, what are you going to do with all these people that's coming, not only from south of the border, which is Latin America, but also from Europe, Asia, all these Middle Eastern countries that also wants to come here and have a little bit of what we all enjoy here. But because I believe, and we all are from outside. No, I don't think a Native American Indian is in here, but we want to come here. And they are coming because their country is violent. It's hard to make a living in a violent place. Imagine here terrorists, how scared it is for us. Imagine you will have that every night around the corner of your house. So these people are seeking asylum, and I think they need to be screened faster, and they need to be, instead of being in holding in cells that are not appropriate, not even for chickens.
Yes. Thank you. Yeah. Thanks for the question. Appreciate it. Thank you for being here and for asking the question. Our president, as you know, wants to build a 2,000-mile wall. And I mention this because you need to understand what he proposes to spend relative to what I think our solution could be. $30 billion, 2,000 miles, 30 feet high. And not only will we have the cost of a wall that will deter no 3-year-old boy in a cornfield in Brownsville, Texas from fleeing certain death back in Honduras, but it will force you and me and our fellow Americans to take the ranches and farms and homes of our fellow Americans through eminent domain, because it will not be built on the center line of the Rio Grande River Channel, which is the international boundary. It will be built miles into the interior of the United States. They won't be able to believe this down the road, that we willingly gave all of this territory up to another country for false fears and paranoia based on a problem that we do not have. For a fraction of that $30 billion, we could invest in violence reduction in Honduras and Guatemala and El Salvador. We're spending right now $500 million, every penny of which this current president wants to zero out to punish those countries, which, as you know, will not stop people from coming. It will make the problem worse, and more of them will be here, which makes you wonder what his motives are in doing this. If we were to double what we are spending, $1 billion, we have shown that for every dollar we spend successfully to reduce violence in those communities, fewer children and their mothers and sometimes their fathers feel like they have to flee to the United States. They have a reason to stay at home. So we can address this problem at a fraction of the cost if we do this responsibly, engaging with our partners in the Western Hemisphere and in Latin America, and as you suggest, and in other countries. We can also change our immigration laws to reflect our values and our reality. We have visa caps that are so artificially low that when you ask someone to do this the right way and get in the back of the line, you may not realize that line extends 20 or 25 years right now to join your family or to work a job in this country that no one else is able to do or willing to do right now. So raising those caps to match what our true labor demand is, or our human interests in one another and being able to have families to be reunited, is a smart way for us to go. It doesn't cost us anything. It actually brings in so much more revenue into this country. So I think we have a chance to live our values right now. And whether we make the case along the moral dimension or the fiscal dimension in terms of spending our taxpayer resources a little bit more wisely, this is clearly the right thing to do. Republicans, Democrats, independents alike that I've listened to agree that the current system is not working, and that working together we can make it much better. So you've got my commitment to do that as well. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Thank you all for having us out. Very, very grateful. Hope to see you again before long. Thank you. Bye.